Well, welcome, everyone. My name is Benjamin Beaver, and I love that I just get to welcome you here tonight to Where Do We Go From Here? This is a wonderful collaboration between 100 Black Men of Akron and Love Akron, and I'm just excited to jump into this conversation. Before we do jump into this conversation, though, I'd love to know where you're coming from. So if you can find that chat, if you're on Zoom, just go ahead and type in where around Akron you might be engaging from. Would love to know that. Also want to let everybody know I recently became a dad. Hey, there's always excitement. For the fourth time, there's always silence after that part because people are like, oh, that's your life decisions. All right. But I am excited to introduce a very good friend of mine from Love Akron, Miss Lori Porter. Miss Lori, over to you, my friend.
Hello, thanks a ton, Ben. I'm really excited to be here with you all tonight. We want to thank our sponsors, our friends over at the Knight Foundation. Their continued support is what helps us to keep this collaborative effort going as we continue the conversation in an effort to answer the question, where do we go from here? On behalf of Love Akron and Coach Kent Boyd, I want to say that it's our pleasure to labor with Coach Irby on this platform in this effort to really help our community to thrive. And then before I bring Coach Irby on, I just want to invite you all to join us on next Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. We are there every third Wednesday at 1:30 doing something that we call conversation versus collision. If you've not been a part of this black and white discussion, it's something you don't want to miss, but it's every third Wednesday at 1:30. And so the reason why we're here tonight is to figure out where we go from here. And so Coach Irby, Michael Irby, who is the president of the Akron, I'm going to call it the Akron chapter of the 100 Black Men. And I thought how interesting that it's 100 Black men. There's a white guy that introduced you and then a female. I love the diversity of this organization, that an opportunity for folks to just join in and be a part of making our city better. Coach Irby, thank you for allowing us to sit at the table with you. And so if you'll introduce our lovely guest tonight, we are happy to have you do that.
Thank you very much. Happy I missed out last month, but I'm back. I'm excited because I think what we got going on tonight is important. It motivates me, and I to acknowledge what you said about the partnership with Love Akron. This has been a great partnership, and it's a blessing, and we're going to keep this thing going as long as we have breath in our lungs. I'd like to welcome everyone to the 100 Black Men of Akron Community Virtual Forum. Tonight, like I said, is a good night. I just hope that we have a lot of young men throughout Greater Akron attending this event tonight. I know for sure some of the panel, we're going to have 4 young men I know from Firestone High School that's going to be involved in this Zoom tonight. Outstanding young man. They're from our Leadership Academy. And so looking forward, excited to get these young men engaged. I think that one thing that we need to be concerned about here in Akron is our young people. I think we need to keep them engaged, and then what's going on, we need to be positive with them. We need to listen to them. We need to support them because I'm a believer that our young men and young women are the future of Akron. So if we're going to move forward here in Akron, we have to make sure that we keep our hands on these young folks from the 100. That's the way we feel about it. Right now, I'll turn this over to our Vice President of Administration, Mr. Lash, and he'll take it from here.
Well, Mr. Lash, you look very good. but we can't hear you. So whatever you're saying, it looks good, my friend, but I can't hear you, which kind of hurts the ability to be able to hear you speak. You are.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, you are looking great. Go for it, Lash.
Yes. Thank you, Coach Irby. Thank you, 100 Black Men, and thank you, Love Akron. And just want to greet all the young people out there who are tuning in, and the parents, community leaders, and advocates. We're here once again to have this virtual forum with some of our favorites from the Akron Police Department. And those would be none other than a gentleman who is actually special and special to me, and that would be Chief Kenneth Ball and Lieutenant Mike Miller. So I want you all to just kind of relax for a little while. I know we have some young men who are here with us, and we're going to have just kind of dive in and have a conversation that I hope will be meaningful, uplifting, and educational at the same time. So thank you. Without further ado, we're just going to actually welcome back Chief Ball and Lieutenant Miller. Chief Ball, for those of them who have not been with us for these past two conversations, now this one would be the third. Would you just kind of give a brief introduction and just share with them some of your background and what you do for the city of Akron?
Sure. Thanks for having me, 100 Black Men. I think that these are opportunities. They're not chores. It is a responsibility that we all share to participate and to figure out how we can communicate, how we can listen to one another, which is so important, because I think the most important thing that we're missing sometimes is just information and the ability to make educated conclusions about important matters. And 100 Black Men is providing that chance right now for all of us that are on here. So I'm thankful for that. I am the Chief of Police of the Akron Police Department. I've been a 30-year member of the department. I think it's an incredibly important job, and it's a chance for me to use, I believe, God-given gifts in my position to represent those things that are important to my value system and that line up with the expectation our community would have of me and my organization. And I think it's a mission in my life, and I'm thankful for the opportunity that I had to do that. We participate in meetings like this on a very regular basis. And I also, with that, want to say I appreciate the spirit that's behind this meeting. This is not APD come out swinging and defend yourself. It's also not 100 Black Men come out swinging and go on the attack. It really is a representation of like-minded people who want to work together and communicate well so that we can have an impact in our neighborhoods to make them safer, more livable. And I think we're making progress in that area. So again, I've worked in all sections of the police department, the patrol division, investigative subdivision I ran when I was a deputy chief. So I've got a lot of overall general knowledge. And I also have the privilege of having two of my lieutenants here tonight from the department. One is Michael Miller, might be a familiar face to some of you. He is our police information officer. So he writes all of our information that we share on a daily basis of what's happening in the department. And he also will be the one that they call for interviews for the news and for media or other forms of media. And he also runs our community relations unit. So he's in charge of the groups that go out and try to help us to connect in the neighborhoods in ways that are non-traditional for police. And he's a great representative of who we are and what we represent. Next will be Michael Wren, and he's the lieutenant in charge of our juvenile bureau. And based on the topics that we wanted to cover tonight in the audience that we'll have, Mike is a subject matter expert for us, and he's right in the trenches for most of the questions that'll be asked today. So I want you to get a chance not to just see me each week, but also to see some other members of the department, so that you can have confidence that it's a group of men and women with high integrity and similar goals and similar values that you all will have.
Great. Thank you, Coach Ball. And would your other officers who are here, Lieutenant Miller and the other lieutenant, would they mind just giving them a brief introduction for the benefit of our young men and women who would be attending this evening?
Yes, good evening. Good evening, sir. Thanks for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to participate again in this very necessary discussion. Like Chief Ball said, I also am enthused and inspired by just the collective passion and spirit that goes along with having a discussion like this. And as he mentioned, it's designed for us to listen, to understand one another, and find out ways that we can not only get better, but strengthen our relationship and our partnership with the community. I'm from the Akron area. I've been on the police department for 21 years. I've had 21 very inspired, dedicated years. And as the chief mentions, I'm in a unique role now where I'm tasked with communicating with the public, as well as facilitating some of the department programming with respect to community relations and community-based programs. So I couldn't be happier to be here tonight and to be part of continuing this conversation.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize. It looks like I'm under Mike Miller's name on the board there. I was having trouble getting on, so he forwarded me his invite. So I think I am listed under him. But my name is Michael Wren. I'm a lieutenant with Akron. And I do want to echo the same thoughts. I am excited to be here. Hopefully can answer most, if not all, of your questions, especially as it concerns the juvenile justice system. I'm currently an 18-year veteran of the police department. My current role, I'm a juvenile unit supervisor. I also supervise our missing person units and our auto theft unit as well. But most of my job comes down to the juvenile unit. We handle mostly juvenile victim crimes when the victims are juveniles, and that goes everything from like shaken babies, human trafficking cases, all the sudden deaths, the child pornography stuff. So anything, child sexual assaults, anything that has a juvenile as a victim is kind of pretty much where we investigate. So just like Chief Ball said, I do have, some experience in dealing with the juvenile justice system. And just like I said, I'm hoping I can answer, some of your guys' questions today.
Sure. Thank you. And it's great to have you with us this evening. You're new to our panel. And for the benefit of just to kind of get this conversation started, and either of you can answer this question before we actually turn it over to some of our young participants. But what types of programming does the Akron Police Department have for the youth in our community?
Well, as you know, we're all kind of uniquely impacted with the pandemic, COVID, and things of that nature. So it kind of suspended some of the momentum behind some of the planning, some of the things that we've been in discussion to facilitate. But historically, I can tell you, and then some of the things that we'll renew, a lot of our initiative is finding ways to just get out into the community in a grassroots way. And some of the most common ways to do that historically for us are recreational based programming. So looking forward, my expectation is that we will partner with and continue our partnership with the Akron Public School System and/or the recreational leagues or programs to find ways to partner with them to participate in some of the recreation-based things. Last year, for example, prior to COVID, we facilitated over 400 separate community-based programs. Many of those programs were in partnership with Akron Public Schools and other nonprofits. Again, some of that was suspended kind of, in the first or second quarter due to COVID impacting us all. But we're very much willing to continue some of the historical things we've done with respect to some of the recreational programs. The mayor's program that he brought back, the basketball program. We hope to have a more visible participation role in that program and programs like it. As we've mentioned in other conversations, it starts as simple as that seed that's planted, which is getting out, listening, communicating, but also building a relationship. So even from a patrol standpoint, and Chief Ball, I know can speak very in depth to this, but obviously, from a patrol standpoint, there are certain required priority-based things that we do, how we respond in communities with respect to responding to calls for service. But we also look for many unique ways to just interact. So whether it's a sunny day or something like that, calls are slow. Many officers that I've supervised, many officers that I've seen do this on other shifts, we just get out of the car and have a conversation, whether it be with a basketball, football, or just finding some common link, some common discussion. And I've heard many officers initiate conversations, life skill oriented conversation with respect to, future, your grades, and making proper decisions. So those are all some of the sentiments and spirit that, obviously fit within our department's mission statement. And I know our officers are passionate and eager to further those conversations any chance we can. I have a list of some of those programs that I mentioned that I can forward. Be too many to mention here in this discussion, but every one of those programs is designed to getting out and getting to know the community, in particular young people.
Thank you, Lieutenant Miller. Those are some very important information that I hope that some of the young men and women who are actually participating this evening, they're hearing you and will seek out that information and participate. Before we go on, we actually have some young participants, and I want to actually give them an opportunity to join the panel because I think they have some questions that they would like to pose to you officers. And I think I'd like to introduce who wants to go first. I see there's a few in Carlo Johnson. Mr. Carlo Johnson, would you mind giving us an introduction, just kind of sharing where you're from and asking your question to the officers?
I'm from Akron, Ohio, right by Firestone. And I guess my first question would be, regarding the George Floyd situation, how would you have handled it, like knowing the backlash now, how would you look back and handle it better to where nobody ended up dying?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, I don't believe that it would happen in Akron. The way that we train our officers and the way that we supervise our officers and the standard that we set out for everyone in our organization, I would hope would never permit anybody to think that the tactics that were used there were acceptable, because they weren't. And our message to the public, my message to the public right away was, we're not good with it. It was horrific to watch the video, and I watched every minute of it, and I know most officers in our organization would have. And it gave us an opportunity to address our officers, all of them, soon afterwards about exactly what happened in there, and to answer any questions our people would have, and to make sure that there was no room in their thought process to think that, hey, what that cop was doing was okay. It's very difficult. One of the things I think is important is to recognize that the guy had a uniform on, but his individual choices don't represent all of law enforcement, because I think law enforcement all over the country condemned those actions immediately, and were supportive of criminal charges being signed against the main officer involved. So we are. Several things. We do not had not permitted neck restraints and chokeholds. That had not been a part of our policy for over 10 years. So a lot of policy changes that occurred after that didn't need to be done here, because we had already had a very specific policy that forbid them. But unfortunately, this job is extremely dangerous. Things happen very quickly, and oftentimes the interactions are unknown to the officers. And there's also a possibility of an officer doing things that are extremely selfish, those things that don't match up to our standard. And that's one of the things that we have to be prepared for, is that there are going to continue to be incidents where there were negative interactions between law enforcement and the public. And what we can't do is we can't assign the responsibility or the frustration or anger that we may have toward that individual to everybody who wears the uniform. And unfortunately, that's something that we have seen with great regularity over the last summer, that because of a single officer's choice in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and of course, a couple of others that were on the scene that needed to do more than what they did as well, that everybody wearing the uniform comes up with this, we support cops regardless. And that's absolutely not true. Our thin blue line is that we take care of each other, but it's not that we cover for each other. It's not that we'll lie for anybody. It's not we will escape our mission or our internal standards just because somebody else wears the uniform. They have to be doing the things that represent high character, follow the law, follow our procedure. Again, I'll say, I don't think it would happen in Akron. We haven't had anything that would closely resemble that at all. We've been trained in positional asphyxia, which was something that, really came into police nomenclature about a little over 20 years ago, 25 years ago, maybe, where there were people that are having medical or psychological emergencies, and sometimes their bodies are overwhelmed. So we stopped resting our bodies on top of suspects as soon as the incident was under control, because there is a greater risk that exists when somebody's going through some of those issues. So we train our people. We train our people from the start when they're hired. We certainly try to, force our value system on anybody who's a member of this department, and reinforce on a regular basis through supervision that if you're stepping outside, you're going to be corrected and moved back to a place. If it's a matter of training, then as an organization, we'll adopt training to make sure that it addresses all facets of that so that we're not running into those issues.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chief Ball. And I'm going to ask if our young men participants, if they would mind unmuting themselves so they can participate in the dialogue and conversation. And before we actually pose a question or open it up for our other participants, can any of our officers address the question that's come up as, how old do you have to be before you can be arrested? How old do you have to be before you can be arrested? Can you answer that for our audience this evening?
Yeah, I can chime in on that. And unfortunately, there's not a single answer. It's not a particular age.
Sure.
There are some guidelines that we follow, as well as the prosecutor's office that follows. But generally speaking, anyone under the age of 12 that case would have to be reviewed by the prosecutor's office, the juvenile prosecutor's office, and one of their supervisors to determine first, is the juvenile competent to be charged. And kids mature at different ages, and a lot of that is trying to determine, do they understand what they did was wrong? Are they capable of assisting in their defense? And sometimes those things actually have to be determined by professionals, and the court can order that. But generally speaking, it's going to depend on the nature of the offense, as well as the age of the child and the maturity level of the child. So 13 is kind of where we kind of use as a general guideline, but they can go down, a few years younger than that. So unfortunately, I can't give you an exact, answer to that, but 10 is usually the bottom line. Since I've been in juvenile, I don't think I've seen anybody lower than 10 go through. But that's going to be up pretty much to the prosecutor's office to determine, if those cases would be prosecutable. And we do work closely with the Summit County Prosecutor's Office. They have a juvenile division that we work closely with. Samantha Harding is one of the supervisors over there. So again, it just basically going to depend on the nature of the offense. Obviously, the more serious the offense, the closer they're going to look at it, and then the maturity level as well as the age of the child.
Thank you, Lieutenant Wren.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to ask Mr. Denver Harding Jr. Mr. Denver Harding Jr., if he would ask his question. Welcome, Mr. Harding.
I'm from Akron, Ohio, Rodson Firestone High School. My question is, what training protocols do you guys go through while in the police force and also trying to get in the police force?
Mr. Harding, that's a great question. Is one also very often asked. We, this year, for example, the Akron Police Department brought back our very own police academy. It's a state certified. OPATA is the governing agency of that training. We brought back our own police academy. It had been essentially 12 years or more since Akron held or hosted our own police academy training. That is typically nearly approximately 30 weeks of training, receiving state certified and state mandated curriculum over a variety of different topics. So we hold our own, we host our own academy. We have our own training academy commander, supervisors, and a collection of officer training staff officers. And each Akron officer, when they're newly hired, goes through that required training before they hit the street. In addition to that, though, we have an additional, every new officer has a full year of probationary period, and during that time receive supplemental training. They train with a senior training officer called an FTO, field training officer. And so they constantly receive that guidance under the direction of a more senior officer until they are off training and or probation. And many police departments around the city have a similar program, but there's essentially 30 weeks of training. And then yearly we receive mandatory in-service training on a variety of topics: legal, mental health, juvenile related topics, and a host of other required training. But great question though, thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Miller. And one other question has come from our audience is, what should a young person do if they are arrested or are suspected of a crime? What should they do?
Okay, if I understand your question correctly, you're asking what does a young person do if we suspect them of a crime?
Yes, if they are arrested, apprehended, and are suspected of a crime, what should they do? I mean, I'm sure that this has occurred many times within the city. And just since we have a young audience, or we have parents of young people, what should a young person in that particular situation do? If you could, give some advice.
Okay, Lieutenant Wren, do you want to go first on that, and I'll provide some backup on that?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I think the most important thing, and this is a message that we really have to cement in the minds of our youth. We want to keep them safe. We want to take care of them. And obviously not every kid is going to make the right decision every point in time. So they may have interactions with police. And if they start with always follow the directions of a police officer, then they're going to be in good shape. If there's any disagreement about exactly what happened, we're getting two different stories from people that may have been involved, we can sort those things out, and we're going to get to the bottom of what happened. Our job is to find fact, and then we take that fact and we apply it to the laws that are written, and we make our decisions only based solely on those things. So the most important thing is just to follow the directions of a police officer. It may seem like we're not the good guys because of stuff that we're inundated with that have happened all across America. But we really, truly are the good guys. Our people are out there to keep you safe, to keep your neighborhood safe. And if you have, made a mistake and you've done something you shouldn't have done, and there are going to be consequences, accept the direction of the police officers, and those consequences are going to be fair. It gives us an opportunity, as I mentioned before, to sort out what those facts are and to come to a decision. But if you're running from a police officer, it changes the dynamic so drastically, so quickly, because we don't know, is he running because he's got a weapon on him? Is he running and going to lead a police officer into a dangerous situation? Is he going to want to fight when we catch up to him? So those things are all important. In each of those situations can be completely avoided if we're following the directions of officers in the field.
Chief Ball, just kind of piggybacking off of your response, can you address the if one is fleeing out of fear? Because that is a reality as well, that, hey, the police are here and they could be guilty and they may not be guilty, but they're fleeing because they're afraid of what they think may happen. Can you kind of address that and maybe say something that may, make sense in their young minds to kind of get back to what you originally suggested in the first place?
Well, I think it's a really difficult situation because everybody hears, and especially in inner cities in 2020, that you can't trust the police, that we're bad guys, and somebody's even said with a very large platform that we're out hunting young Black men, and there couldn't be any statement that could be further from the truth. So I would have to appeal to them is you've got to allow your trust to grow, and it's a decision that you have to make. And sometimes it's going to be difficult because all your friends may not believe the same way. But if you're listening right now, and if you have influence in people in your peer group, it needs to start with, you don't have to run because you're afraid of the cops. The cops are never going to do anything to you that's going to harm you. That unfortunately changes when we're chasing people through backyards, or we're running into buildings and we don't know what the circumstances are that we're going to face, whether an individual is armed or what other threat that they may pose. So I understand. Certainly, I'm sure that all three of the officers on this Zoom understand that I'm not facing the same situations. I didn't grow up with any fear of police officers, but I didn't have anybody around telling me that I needed to be fearful of police officers. But it's going to be something that those that are listening have to decide for themselves. Either I'm gonna believe and I'm gonna trust, and I'm not gonna make a situation worse. Because the reality of it is once you run, if the police officer had a lawful right to interact with you and you run, now you're committing a crime. You're obstructing his ability to complete an investigation for whatever reason he was there in the first place. So you're going to get arrested if you run and we catch you. That doesn't mean that you're going to get hurt, and it doesn't mean that you should be getting beaten up in the backyard. It absolutely better not happen with members of the Akron Police Department. We have body-worn cameras on, so you can be assured that that doesn't happen. And we investigate every one of those instances. But you really have to just trust people. And if they don't look like me, you need somebody who looks like you to for it to feel more valid in your mind. Listen to them, that you're going to have to step out and make a decision that you're going to trust police officers. You're not going to listen to the narrative that's out there. And then also you can start to take steps on your own to research the issues, find out what some of the numbers are, and see, is this really white police officers out hunting young Black men in our neighborhood? The reality is in 2019, there were only nine unarmed Black men shot killed in the United States of America. 8 of them were fighting with police officers at the time and posed different threats. And only one was an individual that wasn't resisting. And certainly they're all tragic events that happen. But the best way for us to avoid them is for us to have a high level of professionalism with our officers. But it's also, there's a requirement for our citizens to interact in a way that minimizes any of those risks for themselves.
Thank you, Chief Paul. I know we have a question from Mr. Carlo Johnson. Do you still have a question, Mr. Johnson? Let's see if he's going to unmute himself. Mr. Johnson, you still have your question?
I'm in the chat. I had more than one. I wrote them down.
Sure. We want to get you engaged, so feel free to share.
Okay. My second question was, how do you feel about the Black Lives Matter protests as far as like the peaceful ones, and what do you think shifted or converted them into like riots?
Mr. Johnson, if I may address your question, solid question, I might add, is we as a police agency and Chief Ball at his direction to all the senior leadership members of the police department down to the officers. And from the very beginning of this, we understood, number one, that this collective group of people peacefully demonstrating have an absolute constitutional right to do that. So as a police agency, we embrace, recognize, and respect someone's right to peacefully protest. I think to your point of as to why some of these protests have turned violent, it could be any number of issues, whether it be, those protests start off largely peaceful, and you can have someone that you would classify an outsider or an outside agitator, someone with a different agenda, someone not seeking peace, not wanting to get along, trying to influence negatively, one or more or small group of peaceful protesters, and then it changes the culture or dynamic of that otherwise peaceful incident. Some of the other things, obviously, then frustration and anger. So there are a variety of different motives that would change the complexion or nature of how these demonstrations go. I'm not sure of how closely you follow the ones here in Akron. I know something that I've been very deliberate to mention, and I think the collective group would agree, is that we have a great foundation and a great history with this community. And I think in part that played a huge role in most of our demonstrations. We've had up to a dozen or more demonstrations. They all have been largely peaceful, barring just a few minor incidents. And I think that's a collection or reflection, I should say, of not only the participants and their resolve to do that, but also the city leadership, from the mayor's office to the police department. And so collectively, we've seen a lot of success with that. So moving forward, should there be any others, we hope that there wouldn't be a flashpoint or something that would trigger any type of unrest. But like the chief mentioned, I wholeheartedly agree. And Coach Kim said this in our very first meeting. And so if I could borrow that from him, I will, which is, Love Akron. This is, we're talking about the Akron community. And certainly some of that provides some context and has some understanding to reference some of these external events. But we have prided ourselves, as the chief mentioned, on our training, on our building relationships with the community, encouraging officers to get out and get to know people like you, Mr. Johnson, and some of your friends. So, and we think that goes a long way to help us as a police department and the community be successful.
Thank you, Lieutenant Miller. In fact, Mr. Stevens and Mr. Carmichael, I'm going to come to you next, but there is a question that was posed in the chat for our officers. This comes from Mr. Chris Winkleman, and it says, are law enforcement officials on this call in favor of trying different approaches to calls, such as responding with mental health experts and or unarmed community volunteers prior to armed police officers' arrival in an attempt to avoid a situation from escalating? And he follows it up by saying, are there any talks or efforts like these in the works here in the Akron community? So I'm going to pose that question to our officers, and then I'm going to get the questions of Mr. Carmichael and Mr. Johnson. Mr. Stevens, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll take this one. We certainly are open. I would love for officers not to go to the house of or the home of a juvenile student at 8 o'clock in the morning who's arguing with his mom because he doesn't want to go to school. And then we show up and there's an escalation because he may not have a great opinion of police and us being there to start with. And, we shouldn't be in a role where we're taking that parental position. Those are things that ought to be able to be settled in the home or in other outlets that are better to handle something at that level. For mental health, same thing. No officer is thrilled to get called to that call of a man naked running down the street, screaming obscenities and acting violently, because we know before we get there, there's a likelihood that it may end up in a dangerous interaction between us and that person. Figuring out, and this is for others to figure out who would be responsible for committing resources that would take some of these responsibilities away from police officers, is how does a social worker handle that situation I just described? How does a social worker or some other agent handle a group of suspicious people that have gathered behind a high school, and somebody who's untrained walk back there and find out what's going on, and there's a very likely possibility that that could turn dangerous. Or if they don't have the support or the respect of a law enforcement position, that interaction could put them at great danger. So figuring out ways that others who may be more highly trained or just more experienced, or really geared toward whatever issue it is, yeah, we're open to that. We'd love to be able to have our officers doing other things than some of those calls, but it just is figuring out how do we do that and how do we do it safely for all parties involved.
Sure.
So
thank you, Chief Paul. That's a great answer. I want to actually open it up for Mr. Jody Stevens. Thank you, Mr. Stevens, for joining us this evening. And what is your question for our officers this evening?
Thank you. My question is it a certain point of time or a certain amount of danger that you have to be in to pull out your weapon, your gun?
yeah, in that situation, there would have to be a belief of the officer in that moment that he or another were at great risk of physical harm. So, it could depend on the situations. It could be as sublime as walking up to write somebody a traffic ticket and their hands are underneath the seat of their car and they're not showing their hands. Where do people keep weapons often in cars? Well, it's underneath the seat. So in that quick moment, a police officer could think, I'm not taking a chance. I want to see your hands with his weapon out. Or we're responding to a call with the firearms involved, shots fired call, a shooting has occurred. We have no idea who we're going to come into contact with on our initial response. So that would be appropriate for an officer to have his weapon out and be ready should there be an immediate deadly interaction that would occur. We don't pull it out to show force. We don't pull it out to intimidate people. None of those things should be occurring. It would be only the circumstances where an officer believes that his life or another's life may be in great danger. That answer your question fully?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. And we actually have Mr. Lamarion Carmichael. Mr. Carmichael, what is your question?
My question would just be, what made you guys want to be police officers?
Great question.
I'll go first with that. It is a great question. It's probably the single most asked question, especially in a context of the youth. And, I grew up in the city of Akron. My family dynamic was challenging, raised by a single parent. And so I grew up all over Akron, as a matter of fact. And as a young man going to Akron schools, I often saw the police in the neighborhood, and my experience wasn't negative. I always saw the police doing something decent, something positive. And I understood at an early age that they also wouldn't always blow bubbles. It wouldn't always be a joyous occasion, if you will, but come a time very necessary to do, real work, as we call it. But most often I was drawn to the spirit and passion of being a police officer for the reason that I can give back to the community, that I can make an impact on a young man or young woman in the community. So I wanted an opportunity to serve, and this job gave me the best opportunity to do that, to give back to my community. And that was my motivation for being an officer.
I can jump in next. Mine was for the same reasons as Lieutenant Miller's, but mine was a little bit different. I did grow up in a single family home as well. My father passed away when I was younger. And my male role model was pretty much my uncle. And he was a police officer in a small city, a little south of here. And I remember as a kid going to they had a town fair. You go there and he would be in uniform. He would stand there and everyone would come up, talk to him. They would bring him his problems. He was able to help people, and people looked up to him. And just like I said, he was able to, people felt comfortable coming to him and having problems, even not police related problems, just other problems that he was able to, help people through and help them work them out. And you know, I always looked up to that, and that's what kind of led me into this profession. You know, I did go to college for a few years, wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and then you know, I look back on my past, and I thought, you know what, a police officer I think would be a good role for me. You know, I grew up here in Akron as well. Spent most of my life here. Went to the Akron schools, and you know, we did have officers in the schools too, and my interactions growing up was almost always positive with the officers. So I thought it was a good opportunity to get back to this city. You know, kind of the same way that Lieutenant Miller did. But my, you know, my I guess reason was a little bit different, just because I did have someone in law enforcement in my family growing up.
Thank you, Lieutenant Wren.
Mhm.
We actually, Chief Ball, I don't know if you wanted to chime in on that question or not, but did you want a piece of that?
Yeah, I can. I don't want to bore people and speak too much. You know, I always loved superheroes when I was growing up. And when I was a kid, we only had cartoons on Saturday mornings. And I would be so excited when the Justice League would come on. And as I got older, I really equated, and it should be that job, that the role that superheroes have should be very similar to what cops are doing. You know, you may be coming in to rescue a cat out of a tree for a little old lady. You're making that situation better. If you're responding to some other great threat that occurs, whatever it is that we're doing, we ought to be making somebody's day better in any way that we can. And arresting bad guys, you know, that can make a community better. That people that are at risk or have been victimized or have to live under circumstances where they're in fear, that should not happen. And we have a role in that. But it's so much more than that. It's about, you know, Lieutenant Miller mentioned earlier, pulling over, seeing some kids shooting baskets and getting out of the car with them and finding out what's interesting to you, or what do you want to be when you grow up, and maybe impressing them by making a few shots in a row. And they thought, I didn't think he'd be able to do that. Lieutenant Wren is one of the better basketball players in our department, as a matter of fact. But it was just that. It was a sense of that. And as I got a little bit older, it connected with a faith component that I have in my life. And that not just as a cop do you do that, but as a person you do that. You know, you can smile at people. You can tell somebody to have a good day. And I think that's one of the barriers that exists with law enforcement and community right now, is sometimes people look at us with some side eye, and then you get a little bit guarded, and maybe you give some back. When if one person would just reach out, it can change that interaction. And I had an example of that. I was at a night out for crime a few years ago, and one of the events was at Reservoir Park, and there was a group that was there that was giving out free haircuts as a part of the event. Every one of the barbers was a Black male, and I was walking past, and I looked over, and everybody was kind of giving me mean looks, and I'm thinking, you know, they're mean mugging me, and I thought, I'm going to disarm this. I'm going to walk over, and I'm going to interject, and it's not real comfortable for me because they look like they don't like me. They don't know me. Maybe if they know me, it's going to be different. So I walked in, and they were thrilled that I walked in. And the owner of the college, it's a barber college. The owner of that barber college and I are great friends now, because we started that conversation. Instead of me walking away being bothered by the fact that I thought these guys had contempt for me, and they may have thought the same thing for me, but when we just smiled and talked to one another, I met every single one of them. They wanted to take pictures with the chief of police. And now I go to the barber college on a regular basis to speak with new students. And I've got a great friend that I've made who's the owner of the college now. So I think that it's a responsibility, not just for police, but for the young men and women that are here with us today. Approach a cop sometime. You know, ask them a question. What's your day like? Or how you today, officer? And see if it starts something up, because when we're breaking down barriers like that, there's not a limit to what we can find out about one another, and find out that our likes and our similarities are so much greater than any conflict that might exist, especially when we haven't even talked about those things. And there may not be any of that exists at all. So.
Thank you, Chief Ball. Thank you for and Lieutenant Miller and Lieutenant Wren. And I want to thank everyone who are, you know, who's in the chat submitting questions. And I hope that you all understand that there are a lot of questions that have come through. we're trying to balance the questions in the chat with the questions that the young panelists are asking. But there is one question I would like to share with the officers. There is someone in the chat who actually has asked, just to back up what one of the questions that was asked earlier, is there a certain point of time or a certain amount of danger that you as an officer have to be in before you pull out your weapon? That's a question from one of the guests in the chat.
Yeah, I spoke to that earlier. Was it Mr. Stevens?
Yes, it was mine.
Yeah, was there a part of the question that you needed me to expound on?
Oh, no.
There's a Jaheem Moore who actually is asking the question, he's backing up. Which weapon are you trained to reach for first, your taser or your gun? That's just to back up Mr. Stevens' earlier question.
All right, and the answer there is it depends. You know, we used to train on what was called a use of force continuum. So you start out at this level, you move to this level, move to this level, and there really was a shift in that, because there's not, there are many circumstances that don't allow you the opportunity to move through a particular order of, you know, grab your OC spray, or your taser first, or, you know, put your hands on first. It all depends on the circumstances that you find right now. If somebody pulls a gun on you, you're not reaching for your taser. You know, you're going to lose that battle, and it's not going to be good for anybody involved. So it just has to meet up and be reasonable under those circumstances. That's the measure that is always used by law. Were your actions reasonable under those circumstances? Would the average police officer have made the same decisions that you made at certain points? So there's not a hard, fast rule, but it just is judgment and reinforcing the training that we make. So if you know, the first step can be, if there's non-compliance, the first step could be, you know, well, get their arm, and you're going to move them over to your car. And if they start to pull away, then you might back up and pull your taser out or your spray out. We teach our officers de-escalation, so every one of them has the ability to talk down people and minimize the physical interaction that might occur, the violence that might occur in a call. But sometimes, you know, we're all aware that sometimes that other person has made the decision it's not going to work that way. We'll even get calls. Tell them to send 2 cars because I'm not going back to jail. But we do our very best to de-escalate those situations. But there is not an absolute for this is what you do under these circumstances. It has to be reasonable.
Sure. We have a question from a Mr. Howard who asks, how can parents report problems without retaliation from people causing the problem in regards to gun violence? That's a question from our chat room.
Yes, sir. Mr. Howard asked a question. It's a great question. There are multiple ways. Obviously, you can contact our police department. You speak to a detective directly. You can make many different ways. You can send an email. You can call us anonymous if you would like your name or number not to be included. But essentially, you have a very important piece of information to provide us. And as you know, over the last several months, you know, gun violence has been something that's had our full attention, and we've made some great strides to reduce some of the incidents of gun violence. And many times, the success in being able to do that would often depend on cooperation we receive from the community. So we always look for someone's willingness or the community's involvement, participation in sharing vital information, and we guard that information by request or otherwise confidentially if the particular citizen would request that.
Thank you, Lieutenant Miller. And for our few remaining minutes, I'm going to ask if all of our young men, Mr. Johnson, Stevens, and Carmichael and Harding, if you would unmute your phones, because I want to actually kind of leave this period or the remaining minutes that we have together this evening for you all to just ask any questions that may be on your mind or on your heart to the officers while you have their ear. So if any of you have any questions that you'd like to share or ask for the benefit of the audience, feel free to go ahead and ask those questions now.
How do you guys feel like about the shootings that have been happening lately in Akron?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the end of your question. About how do we feel about the shootings
That have been happening lately in Akron?
You know, I think if you're not overwhelmed by it and devastated, then you know there's something wrong, and somebody's compass needs to be recalibrated. It's terrible that anybody in our neighborhoods would have to live through the fear that's created by that, or be victimized, or somebody be seriously injured or killed. So we certainly are working our very best to do what we can to eliminate it. So we're not indifferent by any means whatsoever. We spend a lot of resources, and we've had a lot of success too. I'll give you a quick example of it. Minneapolis, St. Paul, which is a city that's twice as large as the city of Akron. They had a special task force that worked over the summer for 3 months, June, July, and August, and they worked specifically on gun violence. And they were thrilled that they got 186 guns off the street in those 3 months. Akron Police Department, with no special efforts, no extra funds, our people working, recovered 289 guns off the street in the same period of time. So we've been very, very active. We've had good results. The numbers that we had that were increasing for gun violence are now back on the decline. Some of it was stymied by the COVID. We weren't interacting as much because of the safety of the public and the community regarding reference to the pandemic. But now we're back out there full force, and we're having good results. But we got to get a hold of it. And you know what, you guys have to be a part of it too. You have to speak up. Don't agree with it. If you got buddies or people that you know with school that you know are carrying handguns around, a handgun is going to be a key to either prison or to the cemetery. Neither one of those are acceptable outcomes. So we really have to have guys that are your age that say, I'm not being a part of it. I'm not being around anybody that's a part of it. I'm not carrying a gun because I'm not going to be in places where I would feel that I would be endangered. If I'm not heading to that place. So it's very important to us, and we're devastated by it as an organization because we truly are a part of this community, and we want it to be safe for every resident in the city of Akron, every visitor in the city of Akron.
Thank you, Chief Ball. Young men, are there any other questions before we draw to a conclusion?
I got one question.
Sure, Mr. Harding.
Does the way someone look, or like if you know their background, affect how you approach the situation with them?
It doesn't.
I couldn't hear the question. Go ahead.
The young man asked, he said, does the way someone looks, or if you happen to know something about their background, does that influence the way that we approach them? And that would fall under the umbrella of bias, or someone using a bias or a preconceived notion or prejudice to impact the way they do policing. And that's something that was at the forefront of what we've long done by implementing policies and procedures to ensure that we have bias-free policing. And so it is our expectation as leaders on the police department that none of our people are using any considerations like those, but they're more so guided by the circumstances of the call, the nature of the call, and who descriptions that are provided to us that kind of point us in a direction to have a conversation with someone. So that is not our expectation. That doesn't align with any policy or belief that we share, and we do everything we can to ensure that every person that we interact with is treated fairly, respectfully, and that'll always be our commitment.
Thank you, Lieutenant Miller. Mr. Harding, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Stevens, Mr. Carmichael, we just want to thank you for your time this evening. You could have been somewhere else doing something else with anyone else, but you chose to hang out with us here as we had this very important conversation with the Akron Police Department. So on behalf of myself and 100 Black Men, I want to thank you for just hanging out with us. And I'm hoping that we'll cross paths and exchange in conversation at some point in the future. Chief Ball, Lieutenant Miller, Lieutenant Wren, on behalf of 100 Black Men and on behalf of myself personally, thank you, because this is the third conversation that we've had. You all have taken time out of your busy schedules to explain to us and have a real conversation. And on behalf of the Akron community, I just want to personally say thank you. You didn't have to do this, but you did, and I'm very grateful for that. Before we actually conclude, I'd like to actually bring in Love Akron's Miss Pastor Lori Porter as she closes out this evening. Once again, thank you all and have a great evening. Pastor Porter.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, I am not Pastor Porter, but I can try my best. Guys, thank you, young men. Like, this was huge. And from Love Akron, we just want to say thank you, because this is loving Akron, guys. We're proud of you, and we love you. And yeah, we're going to be, this is a conversation that's going to continue. We'll announce the actual topic for next month. But if you think the third Thursday at 6 to 7, you can actually sign up for it. We'll put the link out. But we will see you for the next conversation, which, like I said, we'll announce coming up soon. But it is, where do we go from here? And we want to move on together to love our community. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Care.
Hey, Ben.
Hey, buddy. So good to see you, man.